there's questions that beginners would ask, like how do I plug in this cable to my, whatever. And then there's like the questions that everybody always wants to ask is like, is this mix done? Is it syncable? They're always asking the very final step question, right? They're always like, where should when I get paid for my sync, where should I deposit it? In my business account? They're like way past like where they need to be. So my advice would be like, the question that you think that you should be asking, take another step down from that and like ask a pre-question to that. Like be a little bit more humble in your question, right? Like
Hey, it's Mike Myers from the Songwriting for Guitar podcast. Before we jump into this episode, if you're a songwriter, guitarist, and you're looking to advance your skills, gain confidence, and monetize your craft, be sure to check out songwritingforguitar.com for all our free resources. So let's jump into this week's episode. People are excited, Josh. You know why?
I do not know why. Tell me, please.
We're going to talk about questions today. We're going to talk about asking good questions.
All right. Let's ask some questions.
Well, I think it's because as you get further and further down the path, when people are looking at the people that are doing the thing and they're almost placed on a pedestal of just like, oh, they are just so gifted. They're so talented. They're so amazing. And it's like, or we could, and this is what it gets into, or they just asked a lot of questions. I think some of the most like uncomfortable things for people is asking a question and admitting when they don't know something or they need help.
Yeah. I've mentioned this before. When you listen to like any kind of interview with actors or any other professional, sports professional or whatever, they always have that mentor who they, it was like they had that safe space to be able to ask those, quote unquote, dumb questions. And fill in those gaps of their knowledge, like that's key. I mean, and we've all had that. I know that I've had that question, like just haunting me of like, I secretly don't know what a compressor does, like that kind of thing. And you're like, I'm kind of too far along to really like ask what the threshold knob on a compressor does. Like, or those kind of types of things. Yeah.
Well, but yeah, we need to ask questions. That's essentially, it's just like at any point we need to ask questions. It doesn't matter. And the person that looks like they're further down the path, it's just like now they're asking way more questions because they realize they got there because they asked questions. And so if they want to get further down, they're going to have to ask more. And sometimes the questions that you ask are not really the questions that you need to ask because that actually creates another, like if somebody goes like, oh, hey, Josh, how do I make this louder? And Matt, and then you go, well, it's this. But no, so if somebody comes and they ask a question, sometimes the question they're asking is not the question that needs to be asked, but there's a question underneath the question. Like there's another layer to it. And that's why you have to ask the question because you think, oh, this is the important thing I need to be asking. But someone who is your mentor and is down the path, they go, that is absolutely a valid question. Mm-hmm. But what I think you need to ask is actually this. And then that causes either two things. Either it causes resistance and that, the person, no, it's not an important question that they're telling, even though they came to that person because they were like, you have the answers. And then they go, but I do know that's not the answer. Or, so there's either resistance or they go like, oh, I didn't even think of that. What does that mean? And then that actually then creates the answer for the following question.
Yeah. And I've been there so many times, like especially on the mixing journey and production of like trying to figure out like how these great sounding albums are made. I reached out to people and was asking like decent questions, but just the wrong questions for the goal that I was trying to get at, like I would ask like, whatever, something like what kind of drumstick should I be using for, this rock song that I'm trying to record? Because I'm really trying to get that like Dave Grohl snare snap. And they're like, that's not the right question you should be asking. The drumsticks aren't what you should be focusing on. And they were absolutely right. I didn't know what I didn't know what the ingredient was that I was missing or what was like, the most important thing. Yeah. Those kind of things.
But I think then people go either like, oh no, that they either become also self-conscious where they're like, I asked the wrong question. That's what I'm worried about, that I'm going to ask the wrong question. It's like, no, you got to start somewhere and you have to ask, because
Yeah.
then you actually get to the shit that matters and is actually going to provide the answer. So you have to be okay with being uncomfortable too. That's another thing. I think you say that with coaching students, like, hey, you're going to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
And you got to be okay with that.
Yeah. And even, even those wrong questions like help inform me of like kind of where their mindset is. And there's no shame in it. Like if they're like really focused on something and I hear like a deficiency or a gap in their mixes or, whatever, even in their songwriting or whatever, it helps me realize like, oh, they've been spending a lot of time focused on this, or that's maybe where their passion is. And that's an okay thing too. Like they're very passionate about this, not so much about this. Let's kind of see what happens when they put some attention over here. There's just, it's informative.
Or it's like when someone goes, hey, tell me what needs to happen with this production. Tell me where it needs to go. And also tell me just like the balance. Is it good? It's like, yeah, it's not bad. Can I ask you another question? How many songs have you written in the past, like month, 2 months? Oh, 3. Okay. Well, you know what? I think you may have to write a little bit more because the questions you're asking are valid, but I think you need to go back to the writing process and maybe write a few more. And then from that, and have your references, and then just keep on practicing. And then your productions get a little bit better. You can't put stock into the first 2 or 3 songs and expect, 25 years of growth or 5 years of growth in those songs. That's a lot to put on them.
I don't know if I could give like one bit of advice to people on their question asking is maybe take one step back from the level. Like, if you're like there's questions that beginners would ask, like how do I plug in this cable to my, whatever. And then there's like the questions that everybody always wants to ask is like, is this mix done? Is it syncable? They're always asking the very final step question, right? They're always like, where should when I get paid for my sync, where should I deposit it? In my business account? They're like way past like where they need to be. So my advice would be like, the question that you think that you should be asking, take another step down from that and like ask a pre-question to that. Like be a little bit more humble in your question, right? Like
You know what? I think you're right. There's 2 ends of the spectrum. There's like the very beginner, and some people go, I know I checked my gain staging, I plugged in my amp, I'm all good. And then there's the extreme of just like, so what's a balanced portfolio look like in investing with this, the thousands I'm making with it's like, cool. There's about like, 50 other steps in between. Do you have any questions about those 50 steps?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it seems like it's an easy jump, to see someone further down the road. Well, they just did a lot. Yes, they did it a lot, but they did ask questions. And I guess my question to you, and you can tell me if there's actually a question on top of that question.
Right.
Why, I'm making a broad generalization a little bit where it's like, either people are they're very resistant to hearing it, or they just don't want to hear it, or they're uncomfortable. Why do you think people sometimes are just resistant in asking questions?
I think it's insecurity. I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, I think we all had like, whether it was a friend or a parent or relative or whoever that always, we would ask a question, and at some point in our life, we probably all got that's a dumb question. I can't believe you're asking me that, And like that stings. Like you didn't even realize it was a dumb question. And that can like, that can put some scabs over, your vulnerability to like just ask questions. And I think that's where like you need to embrace being uncomfortable and, just ask some dumb questions. Like just get in there, just jump in. The water's going to be cold. But like once you get in there, it starts to warm up, Yeah. So I'm all about the dumb questions. Like the more basic, the more I love like getting into that, because there's nuance in those big beginner questions, or I don't know. I no dumb questions. Like they're all interesting to me.
That to me is interesting. The idea that some people are carrying like the scars a little bit of what someone said, and even the toughest people are like, "Oh no, that's not bothering me." But meanwhile, it's just like that moment of like, "That's stupid," and it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, maybe it is."
Yeah, right.
They're
Yeah.
carrying that, or is you think of school too? Like when you go to school, who are praised, who are lifted up? Well, the people that give the right answer. What happened if just like that's not the important question right now? Oh, okay. I thought it was. So it's
I
just
know.
like sometimes our inquisitiveness is kind of like trampled down by teachers because they're like, well, that's not part of it right now. That's not
I
an
know.
important question. Oh, okay.
And and that's a tough thing. Like, for us as like teachers, as coaches, like, like we could you have that story of like, when you were asking questions, I forget how it went exactly, but we've had that where that's not the question you should be asking right now, or that's not, oh no, I remember what it was. You said like you asked a question and the guy said, well, I could explain it to you, but it's not going to make sense.
Yeah.
Like that's like a form of that. And you're like, and that's like the type of thing where you're trying to be considerate and polite, and, they might be asking about some advanced level. And the answer is like, I could tell you, but really, like, can we talk about this other thing that I think will help get you there? And then you'll understand like what that answer is. And we're not trying to be condescending or insulting or anything like that. It's just really like, we've been there. We know, like, I can't tell you, like, I'm always talking about compressors, but I can't tell you the number of times I had to have somebody explain to me what a compressor does, like what all those knobs mean, like how they all fit together. It took me forever to get it. And like I had to keep asking that same question over and over and over again, and finally it clicked. Like, so yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
And what's interesting is sometimes the answers we get may not always fit 100%. So if somebody's showing you, hey, this is how this is supposed to be done, and then you're doing the thing, and then part of you goes like, okay, so they told me this is exactly, and I've got all the settings right, and I've got everything there.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. But I'm getting this feedback. It's not right. Did they lie to
That's
me?
the
Did they
danger.
lie? And it's like, no, they didn't lie. But it's not always a one size fits all. It's also like the process and the answer may have to change a little bit based on this. That's what's also mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like a whole other angle of like, when you are asking the questions, like really think about who it is you are asking and what their perspective is. Like if I'm going to even some like A-list, like hero mixer person, producer, whoever, songwriter, if they only, if all their Grammys have come from like working with heavy metal artists, as genius as they might be, that's not a genre that I work in. So I'm going to be it's not that I'm not going to ask them questions. Of course I'm going to pick their brain, but I'm going to be very aware and particular of like, okay, what's a universal question that I can ask that's not going to steer me wrong? Because they're going to probably like be setting, doing their things like very differently than what a singer, songwriter, producer, engineer, mixer might be doing. And so you got to be careful of like the questions that you ask and take it into context,
It was interesting. We did, I think this was a couple months ago, and it was a critique. And usually when we talk about sync, we're always talking about builds, drops, and this one song kind of went straight through where it was like, but it felt good. And that was the thing. And then somebody asked the question, it was like, I thought you said builds and drops were important. I'm like, they are, but this song feels really good. Like, it's emotionally pulling me in. And it was just like, and Heather and I were like, this is great. And they were like, so we shouldn't do builds and drops? Or I do. And I'm like, here's the thing. I wish it was a very like, and sometimes the answers we get, and maybe that's why we don't want to ask questions, it's not going to be a yes or no. Kind of like how that dude told me, I could tell you, but it won't make sense. And in the time I was like, you're right, it doesn't make sense. But here I am now. And I'm like, you know what?
It finally does, yeah.
Everything that I've been doing doesn't make it's not a straight. It's all over the place. The thing I thought I was going to be doing then morphed into this. Then I moved here, and that's what he means. He has that it's going to change. It's going to be you're going to have to go with your intuition a little bit, and it's like no wonder he couldn't say like, "Hi, Mike. Here's the form. fill it out.
Right.
It's not. And so when you get those questions about like, well, I thought this rule applied to everything. Yeah, not always. Well, how do I know? That's the thing. You might not know.
Yeah. And that's where like doing a lot of work, like you try, and believe me, I love a hard and fast rule that is always true. And there are so few of them. Like there's always the exception. And I think that's the toughest thing, not only to teach, but also to just be aware of like, when is this breaking a rule? Because like, everybody's always like kind of, I don't know why that is. Like they're always trying to like prove the teacher wrong kind of thing. Like you said everything needs builds and drops and everything needs layers, and look at this doesn't have it. And you're like, absolutely. It totally doesn't. But, this is for a very specific thing. And, you might not see this. We were talking about ads at that time, or whatever the thing is. And this does not work for ads. This works for something else. So don't take the advice I was giving on ad music for this other thing. This works very well for its own thing. Like there's all kinds of caveats to those things.
That's a good word. I love
right?
that. That is that's a wonderful, that is a, just pulled that out of your little word book right there. That's SAT words. Caveat.
It's my
but I
word
think
of the
it
day.
is. That's what is, and I get that too. Sometimes that little resistance of people are like, but you said, and it's like, I know, and I did say that, but like where I am standing right now, it doesn't work. But when will it work? That's a great question. I don't have a yes or no answer. It might eventually work. Where, someone says, when am I going to get my first placement? That is a great question. I do not know. So it took you this long. Will it take me that long? It might. If you, do I had a different workflow and I did this. So if you're not writing a lot, it may take a little bit longer. If you're trying to do everything on your own, it may take a little bit longer. How long? Not sure. Just all I can say is a little bit longer. Or you may run into someone that may go like, oh my God, this is perfect. And it may be even quicker than me.
Right. Or you may like just magically find a killer collaborator who's just like, taking you under their wing, and now you're like got writing credit on the song and it's landed right away.
You see, there's so many different scenarios that we pointed as like, here's what could happen. Here's what could happen. And then so people are always looking for those like universal, I guess, kind of like those truths of like, well, is there anything that's consistent?
Yeah, like, well, is anything true?
Is anything true? And I was like, well, be nice.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. That's one that will never fluctuate. That's probably the only one that I think of that I'm like, that's pretty much it. Don't be nice. Don't be a creep. Create a safe space and respect the other's time. Those are pretty much the only ones that are tried and true. Everything else could change, but you got to ask questions, because if you don't, that's what is so, I feel like, and you're in the same space, when we took classes, when we were in the same class, like I was just asking, here's another one. If there was a speaker, here's a question. And, I didn't want to seem overwhelming, and I would be like, I got to ask, because this is a moment. I don't know when this is going to happen. And I'm always surprised when there's a thing and I'm like, hey, do you got questions?
And nothing.
Silence. And I'm just like,
yeah.
Are you sure? We're just going to throw this out. Any questions? Here's this person. Do you got questions for him? Because it's like, this is crazy.
When I first, so I've said it before that it took me, I think about 2 years, maybe a little bit less, to get my very first sync after I've been like building up my catalog for a while. I just didn't have the contacts. I didn't understand, libraries and stuff like that. And I eventually got to take a music supervisor out to lunch. And man, I tell you, I prepared for that lunch for like an entire day. And I went with a notebook just full of questions. And some of them like weren't great questions. I had to skip over them. They just weren't applicable. But man, I went prepared. I was questioning that guy his entire meal. He's lucky he got to eat.
But I think that's an interesting thing. You said you prepared. So it's like, even if you know that's going to happen, people that come into situations cold and they're just like, I can't think. Yeah, because sometimes your mind it can't compute. It's like trying to pull stuff out and you're like, that's really like, like, where do you like to go? Or just like,
Yeah.
do you have a puppy? It's just like, those are not, that's what your mind's coming up with. You don't have time of this, like, and maybe this is another thing, like kind of carving out some time for like reflection and kind of like thinking about like, okay, well, if I do meet and kind of studying up on them and what they've done and the thing, so that when you're with them, I remember when we would get those moments in that course, if we did a live event and they had supervisors, you could spend like 5 minutes with them. I remember just being like, okay, so I have my drive, I have my song, I have the backup of the song, I have the backup of the backup in case, the backup
Right.
explodes in my back. And it's just like, and then I'm going to be like, hey, I really, it was great because I know so-and-so and da-da-da-da, and I really gave thought to that because that small window is so huge. It's just like, that's where maybe you get that one thing because you asked, and then suddenly makes your brain kind of go like, oh. That's why I like going to conferences or because I know my notebook's going to be full of, I don't want to say I'm suspicious, but I'm a little stitious of like when someone doesn't write down when someone's talking or just taking notes or just like filling up questions or doodling or allowing their imagination to go with what the person's talking, which could spawn question. I'm just like, you're just sitting there expecting to remember.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Do you remember? And it's like, no, you won't. You're not. And man, those are so many missed opportunities of like growth and I don't know, just like paving forward to creating the things that you want to create.
Yeah. Yeah. I look at, I mean, even people outside of anybody that's further along in any path, I look at that as an opportunity to, I don't know, I'm just like naturally curious. Like I'm always wanting, somebody works at a mortuary. I want to pick their brain. Like, how's that work? What's that like? Yeah. Ask
What
questions.
playlist do you have on during the day?
Yeah.
What's acceptable? Is it like, does the playlist change where it's like, the family's coming? And then you switch to like the other one. Like, do you ever eat on your lunch break? Do you just
Right. Yeah.
Like, but no, it's just like, and maybe this is the other thing too. Do you think, and maybe as I'm talking this out, this is causing me to think and ask questions. It's like, do you think people that ask good questions allow their imagination to kind of like go a little bit and just like wander and expand and think and create scenarios so that then suddenly like a question pops out?
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about recently too. Like some people are like, well, I don't even know what questions to ask. So like how does that like come? Like I don't even know where my weaknesses are, and then maybe that's where like, maybe that's where those questions of like, hey, is this syncable? Because that's their goal, right? Like I want to get a sync. So it's it's not that they're doing anything bad. It's just like that's all they can do is like, I've got this goal, it's to sync. Is it there yet? And they don't know how to like break down any other questions. And this is like a whole thing, right? Like it gets into like the active listening of like, hey, I am trying to capture this element in the song. That's like a better question to ask. Like you really have to get out your microscope and start getting into, I want to capture that acoustic guitar, the way that like you can hear her thumb hit that low E string. And I've got songs like that where you can actually hear the fingers on the string as they're strumming, That's such a cool thing to be able to capture. Those are questions that get into the details of like that, like that's like an entire conversation right there. Like, how do you capture that? Yeah, there's on that note, there's this quote from, I think it's Eleanor Roosevelt, like that talks about, what is it? The like simple minds talk about people, average minds talk about events, and then great minds talk about ideas. And that's something that I think about of like thinking about the idea of what you're trying to go after.
But I mean, ideas, yeah, it's just that sitting with, what is it? 3M does this thing that's really cool. Like, it's part of their employees that they have to carve out time of imagination. And I was just like, that's wild that they have to do it, because imagination creates things, but then creating things leads to like, well, how am I going to do that? And then steps, and then you got to ask questions to get to that thing. And so, yeah, when someone says it's, is this syncable? It's like, yeah, that's cool. I get where you're going, because you want to make sure that it is fits. But my next question would be like, what was and what are you trying to do? Have you? And then my mind then goes to imagining, have you tried mixing this, this, and this? Mm-hmm. No. Is it going to work? It might, but I'd try. It's like you just start thinking about things and start maybe creating, well, let me try this. And if it doesn't, maybe I'll just eliminate one of these things and I'll add this. There we go. That you have to, I don't know, just kind of imagine some ideas and then test them out. And it may give you the answer, or it may lead to a question that you go, that doesn't work. But I do like that. I'm going to file that away, but I'm going to take this away. That was my solution. There's not a very simple, well, it's X, Y, Z, and then you're going to exactly get the consistent answer. I think just continuing questions will lead to a process and a system that you'll develop, and that will become more and more predictable over time. But then even then, you're going to be like, I got to mix things up. Like, it's just now it's like, I don't want to deliver the same thing again and again. So you know what? I'm going to try this. And then or it's like, I'm going to go over here. That's something. I feel like people that get further down the path want to be more uncomfortable. They don't want to be very, protected and just like, oh, this is great. This is great. They want to be uncomfortable. They want to be like, God, because they know this is like a new period of growth. Because if they're super uncomfortable and they're really pushed, that's where it's just like, oh man, this is like a new extreme. Nothing good comes from just, I was so comfortable, and then, man, great things happen.
Yeah, I always have to have at least one element that is pushing me forward. Like I'll do like several songs in the same style to make sure, like, especially if it's a new style and I'm trying to capture it and that's my challenge, I'll do several more to kind of prove to myself like, hey, I can replicate this. I really do have this down, But after that, I need to add an element. There has to be something to it that is pushing me, holding my interest, because after that, then I'm just kind of going through the motions and it doesn't feel as inspired.
It's interesting that you said that you stay with it for a little bit just to learn the I guess kind of like the blueprint or the boundaries of just like, cool, this is what, and then you gain some consistency. Cool, now I got to add something to mix it up. Otherwise, it's just going to be like, I don't want to say like a watered down or a Kool-Aid version of what you're making, but it's like you got to do something to it to just make it like you, but still have that authenticity of the genre, the style, so that when you pitch it, they're not going to be like, this is wildly off. Were you even listening to what it is? And it's like, but no, you've got those elements, but now you've got that thing. It's like when they say, what does he have? He's got that thing, that style, that pizzazz. And it's like, that's such an intangible thing sometimes that we're like, what does that mean? How do I get that? Welcome to Songwriting for Guitar, an online songwriting and music coaching hub. I hope you get to know our company a little in the video and get excited that you found exactly the people you're looking for to help you advance your career. If you're a songwriter, producer, or artist, you can find so many tips that will make your process so much easier within this awesome Songwriting for Guitar team. We help you build your music career based on your strengths. We help you fill in the gap of those strengths and lend support among a community as your dreams become goals and become your reality. We've helped hundreds of students hone their skills and get more confident in their craft, as well as thousands worldwide in our past webinars, boot camps, and through our podcast. So whether you're just starting out or you're looking to take your music career to the next level, we encourage you to explore our website, listen to our podcast, and get to know us. Join our community of successful and striving musicians and artists, and let us help you achieve your dreams in music.
I don't know.
Oh.
When you are, when you're meeting with somebody and getting your, you were just talking about like what 3M, they carve out that time for like imagination. Like where does your brain go like when you're thinking of um like asking questions? Like how do you come up with that? Like is there like a certain, like do you start like digging into that, whoever you're going to be asking the questions of? Do you dig into them and kind of see where things might link up, where connections could be made in terms of like where they could kind of provide the most value or be of most service? Is it like how do you go about it?
You know, it was interesting because we had on the Insiders John Lunn, who is the composer of like The Last Kingdom, Downton Abbey, and I was just like, before he came on, I just listened to some of his interviews, and it was really cool. He has a great Scottish accent. It's so thick, and it's so. But it was. I was just like, oh, let me listen to some of his. And everybody sometimes thinks everybody has a niche, like a very. But it was interesting because Last Kingdom was very Nordic, and there were lots of, and it was very ambient. But he had this one vocal that was just like, and I was like, wow. And then there was a recommended from John Lott, and it was like Grantchester. And it was like 1950, I think it was somewhere around the 50s, early 50s, where this show, Jen and I ended up binging on it, and it was great. But I listened to like the soundtrack, very simple, very minimalist, very like piano, and I'm like, man, that is such a departure from this. And then I listened to Downton Abbey, and it was like somewhere in the middle, and then I was like, man, well, I was like, and that was the first question. I was like, how do you go from that to a very classical, very like standard, just like very polite piano piece to suddenly, and he explained that when he sits down, and this is where I was like, this kind of resonated. I was like, oh, I need to do more of this. He goes to his instrument, but he just closes his eyes and thinks about a visual of what does this feel like, and what is it, does this feel like it would move? And he was like, oh, for that Last Kingdom, yeah, I had like these, and I had like all this ambient, but then we brought in, somebody showed me this clip of this woman, and I sampled it because I was like, there's something about her. And then we tracked her down, and then I brought her in, and I flew her, and I was like, wow. So it was interesting that his process doesn't start with okay, so tell me what the script, and he'll read that, but like he's sitting down and he's like, I have to visualize, and I'm like, visualization, and he's allowing his imagination. So it's like, even down that path, he's not getting further. So I'm like, I guess I'm doing a deep dive on them and really, just consuming what they do.
So that's really interesting, and that's a great way to go about that. So you're digging into what they're doing and finding things that interest you, and like kind of prompt questions instead of just being like, okay, I'm sitting down with like a composer, be like, well, what do you think of Spielberg or whatever, like instead of just random kind of like film composer-y questions, you're actually digging into who they are, what they've done, and then finding questions of like, how did they do that? Like, I've never heard that before. And then that's what prompts your questions. I like that.
The natural question would be like, what VSTs do you use? What Bachs do you use? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Not that they're not, I'm sure they're cool, and he could probably tell me a million ones that I should probably go out and binge and buy. But it's like, the plug-in isn't the important thing. It's like the person and like their mind and what they're thinking. That's not correct. Their mind. But it's like, it's just like, what is he thinking when he gets something like, he's given like a template of what, Downton Abbey is, which is like, people are like, when he first got that, the first season, he was like, yeah, they explained that it was going to switch from all these different things. So I realized the pacing of what I was doing needs to, cool. Now he's getting into shit that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So you're even thinking about the transitions when you haven't even seen the footage, but you're trying to visualize it and experience. You've told me everything that I'm like, that is amazing. But now it's just like, now I got more questions. So it's like, is that how it always is? And he's like, no, not always, but sometimes. And it's like, wow, that is, to me, the basic question would have been, or what piano do you have? What piano do you use? And how do you practice? I'm sure those are not those are valid questions. But if I've got 5 minutes with them, I don't think I'm going to be asking that. I'll be like, wow, what goes through your mind? Can you paint a picture of what you're seeing in your head so I can try to visualize that too? And then just be like, oh, okay. That's the shit that gets me like on fire. And I think that's the important too in the questions. Sometimes people are asking questions that are so deadpan, like this, tell me the answer. And it's like, oh man, I sometimes too want a question that's a little bit more like fiery.
Yeah, that has some like layers that you can peel back.
Yeah.
Because there's sometimes like they just ask this kind of like, just, there's like there's nothing to it. It's like, is it sinkable or whatever? Like they're just like these, I don't know, like I feel like what you're kind of touching on is like these universal experiences that, like, even though he's a film composer and like you and I don't really do a lot of that, it's like where is there crossover? Like, the great question is like, what do you do when you get stuck? Like, the writer's block. That's a very common experience, and like that would be an interesting thing to see what he does. Because like, if you ask another songwriter, they might like think about it from a lyric standpoint. Well, a composer doesn't deal with lyrics, so like, what does he do to like get out of that? Like, I think that's interesting.
It's funny you mentioned that, but I did ask him something along that line. He goes, every day he plays a different piece from Bach. He sits down and plays through, because he was like, he has such a vast catalog. You can't help but find something that kind of like, and I was like, that's interesting. So even when the well's dry, then you go to something and then you still fill it up with a new idea or a different approach. And I was like, that's intriguing, because there you go. It still happens. So he's also saying like, hey, it's always going to be there, but you got to find ways to kick that funk. And so I think that was also acknowledgement. Whatever way works for you, find that way. It needs to be there. So it's like if somebody goes, well, I'm writing pop, so I'd listen to Bach every day. I don't, it's not necessarily you should listen. Maybe you should, because you know what? I think Bach was a great, like, he was essentially like a pop songwriter.
Yeah. Right. There's a reason his melodies are still around.
And and you know what? They didn't have any recording. So all you had to take away was just that moment. And so you realized how crucial it was that you remember some sort of piece, something from, because we can all sing da 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 da, or da 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 da. We're singing his melodies or his choruses, if you will, kind of those parts that he comes back to. So that was a cool little takeaway from him, where it was like, so he has writer's block too. And sometimes your questions may not get answers, but also validation that the person that you're asking goes, hey, guess what? That's great. And you know what? I'm still figuring that out. And you can still be further along and still struggle with that question.
I was just gonna say, and I love that, like, that's, in terms of like being humble and like vulnerable and honest, like, those classics are like also what are taught to beginner piano students. Those melody, like, and he's going back to those like beginner. I mean, they're masterpieces, so they're not like lullabies or anything. But yeah, he's like totally being vulnerable and being like, I'm just gonna go back to like my roots in a way and re-explore those now with my ears, with a master's mind.
It's interesting to just have that perspective, because like that was an example of me asking good questions. I can remember when I asked terrible questions. I remember being here and I was visiting a friend and I was watching him. He was nice enough to watch me let him build out a song. He built out a song, showed me his process. It was so quick. I was like, wow, you're getting this done in like an hour and a half. I'm like, how do you do that? And now I'm like, oh, he just did a lot. And that was to me, I was still not at that quota, but then he was mastering and I was like, dude, what are you using? He was like, oh, this is just the UAD mastering pack. I wrote it down, went home and bought it. And I emailed him. I was like, can you screen shoot me your settings? And he was like,
yeah,
I can.
Right.
And I remember being like, no. But now I'm like, oh, that doesn't matter, because like the settings used for that may not work for what I'm doing, and the order, and like I may have to use one less of them. I don't always have to use that precision limiter. I can use a different one. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
That's a great point there. That and I was trying to figure out how to word that exactly. But when you ask questions like that, and I've done this too, where I've asked, your mind is blown. You see somebody like put together a song in like 30 minutes, the entire thing. That's something that takes you weeks to do, and you're like, how do you do that? And then the answer is not as interesting or as mind blowing as you think, and they're answering it. And it's like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. You're doing that and then this. And yeah, that's exactly what I do. Only it takes me like 3 months to get something that sounds half as good. When that happens and you get those answers that aren't as interesting as you thought that they would be, that's like a sign that you need to ask better questions, like rethink the question that you're asking and be like, oh, all right, I'm asking something that's probably above my level right now, or isn't the right question, and that's a prompt for me to be like, okay, I need to figure out like how, let me zoom out a little bit and be like, okay, what is he doing that's really something that is puzzling me, like in a very narrow way, instead of this like broad question of like, how are you doing this?
And it's interesting. I go back to that moment. I'm like, oh, that's the question. That was the answer I should have been paying attention to. The mastering session, settings didn't matter. But what did matter was he wasn't overthinking. He was that's why I was so overthinking. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, the idea that people are like, no, that's the answer. Write more
Yeah.
songs. That's not what they want, because then it's highlighting something they're not doing, that they know they should be doing, but they're dragging their heels, and they're just like, and they're asking less questions, making more excuses of like, well, right now it's a really, right now I just get, and it's like, oh my Lord, do you want to do this or not? Now that's an easy question. Yes, no. That
Yeah.
one does have a very specific answer. Does more problems in the process intrigue you, or does it discourage you? For me, it's intriguing, because I'm like, well, there's more questions I need to be asking. I'm not disheartened. I realize there's no clarity moment of like the entire thing. It's only little bits of it. It's almost like, I don't know, the fog lifts a little bit and you see a little bit more of the skyline. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I see a little bit more, but you don't see everything at once. It's never going to happen.
Something that whole thing on what you're talking about, there was somebody recently who actually did do the thing where they did several songs, and I think they sent me like a playlist of 10, 15, 20 songs, and it was over, it was maybe over like a 2-year period. And just them doing the repetition, they were still, even after doing it for a couple of years, their mixes weren't sounding, they didn't achieve like everything. But even on their own through repetition, you could tell like what they did for their first 5 songs, they were not making those same mistakes on songs 10 through 15. And the things that were consistent of like, oh, they're lacking here. Yep, that's a thread that they're following. They haven't found the solution to this thing that's been bugging them the whole time. Man, in terms of like from a teacher coaching perspective, that's I mean, that's like the holy grail of what I look for in a student. Somebody who's like shown that they put in the work, and even though they've struggled that whole time, I'm like, let's solve this. I know exactly what you need right here. Like, let's dig into this and we're going to solve this for you. And it's going to be an aha moment, because that little thing that's been a pain point for them the entire time, now they can just like fix that and apply it to everything they've done the past 2 years. And like, oh man,
It's changing. It's like, it's one of those things where they're like, holy shit, you're right. I missed that. But it's cool to see too. But hey, you still have been figuring out problems, because you can point like,
Yeah.
hey, this got better, because you
Right.
just stuck with it. And sometimes that's also the answer. It's like, you got to do it again. What do you mean do it again? Just do it again. Well, any tips? Well, do it again, and then I'll see,
Do
and
it
then
again.
we'll meet with this one, and then I'll probably tell you to do it again, and then you're gonna have to do it again. When will I have to stop? But again,
Right.
it's not one of the, again, not necessarily an answer that's intriguing, but it's just like, that's the answer, and it's like, oh, I thought it was gonna be like, tell me 6, and then I could stop. And yeah, this is why questions are fascinating. I don't know. It's just like, it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a chef that I heard on something who is like just obsessed with croissants. I think that's like just obsessed. And he said he didn't feel like he understood how to make a good croissant until after he'd made 10,000. And that's like literally making the exact same thing over and over and over. And he said that he didn't really feel like he knew how to do it until 10,000. And I'm like, to me, that just blows my mind. And I almost don't believe him, but I don't know, that just really like put in perspective of like just what repetition does. And I mean, in a way, I believe it. Like, I can see that because I still struggle with things that I've always struggled with. There's
your
just things that
aren't the greatest. I mean, they're okay.
Right.
They're not bad.
They're okay. But yeah, just repetition. There's just some things that like that there is no other solution for. It's just you just have to do it. And kind of going back to like what I was saying about the person that had been working over 2 years and had the 10, 15 songs done. That compared to somebody who's just bringing me two and saying I've done these two. That's like such a small sample set for me to listen to and be like, where I can't see the thread yet. I can't see where you're struggling. I can't. I can critique these in isolation, but is that really like doing? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like there's a reason that like doctors have you keep on coming back for more blood work because they need to see they need to see what's going on. Like where are you heading? What Yeah.
Is it good direction? Is it good or is it
a
just
good direction?
Is it good direction?
Yeah. Are you eating too many croissants?
But that's so interesting. And it makes sense. Like this weekend, like I had to do a whole bunch of like Shark Week music, and like when you do like production stuff, it's just like you have to do a lot because honestly, I don't really send the first 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Because they're okay.
Mm-hmm.
But like I really get a better template. I get like understanding like, oh, I like this more. Oh, I really hate it. Oh, this was so busy. Oh, this is bad. Oh, this feels bad. Again, it's such sometimes like, well, the question could be, well, what do you mean feel? Oh, I just like I can close my eyes and like they ask for awe and wonder and it feels like awe and wonder. I feel like I could see, I could look at, I'm at the bottom of the ocean looking up and the sun's hitting and it does that like that sparkly kind of thing. And they're talking about conservation in some sense. And that feels like there's, these are majestic creatures. That feels right. The first two, it's okay.
I just want to repeat that for anybody listening that you just said that you don't send the first 2 or 3. And the fact that like we ask people like, hey, do 10 more of these, like do 20 of these. Like you are absolutely spot on. Like you're not precious about it. You're not like every single thing that I'm making is a gold mine, is going to be perfect. I'm absolutely the same way. Like I'm like, I'll collect like a bunch of ideas, like little nugget ideas and not use, half of them really. And you just pick the best ones. It's the same reason why artists say that, I recorded 40 songs for my album and we picked like 12. There's a reason for that.
I think it's super important because, I don't know, then it's also, I realize the craft that I'm doing, I can't just assume like, oh, this is, everything I, shit out is gold. This is great. It's like, it's not bad, but I bet it can be just like better. Well, that comes from not overthinking, just refining a little bit, done. And so it is also a discipline that's built over time. So it's like, I guess the question we can ask, are you building good disciplines in your creative structure where it's like you have those rules? But even when we're giving you the answers, we're still applying those answers to our own things because I tell people, do more. And it's because I know it works. Like once I send, the 4th song after, they'll accept it. It'll get added in. Yep. It'll be okay. Yep. Could they accept song 1, 2, or 3? They might. Could I waste my time just uploading them and being like, that is good. We didn't use that one. Yeah, they probably, that's what's going to happen. And that's okay.
In baseball, it's like your batting average. Like there is no perfect batter. Like they're always striking out in every game. And sometimes they hit a home run. Sometimes they get to first base, whatever. Yeah, and the same thing is true for me. Like, this is about improving your success rate, and you're never gonna get to 100%, and that's what keeps us going. Because like as soon as we got to 100%, then we'd be like, well, this is boring. Like, I
Yeah.
know that they're gonna accept it,
Yeah.
right? I know I did this. Oh, I'm a genius, whatever. But yeah, the same thing's true for me. Like, there's a project not too long ago where I sent 10 at once. You know, like they just wanted me to get my 10 done, and I sent them in, and just like clockwork, they didn't take like the first two, and then they didn't take like the sixth one I did, you know, because maybe I like tried to branch off into something. I was like, ooh, maybe I'll try something over here. They didn't take that one, but you know, like the middle and the end, they took a batch of those songs. That's just how it goes. So that's why, like, you know, we're always saying like do more, like improve your workflow, get these things knocked out. You're going to have to, you know, if you're serious about it, you're going to have to do a lot anyway.
It's interesting that, like, yeah, it's that after batch, that like later batch that seems to be picked up. I did like a series of covers with like Maddie, and the one that we did after was the one that was picked up the most because they were like, oh yeah, this is a really like, and I was like, huh, that one. I was like, really? I thought it would be this one. And it was like, well, when did we do that? Oh, I did that after. And I was like, but there's not a lot in it. Like, it's so minimal. I was like, that's okay. But that's not, you know, I guess the important question is like, cool, do continue to do more. I'm learning. It also validates, cool, that's still the answer. Like, it hasn't changed where it was like, just do 12. It's like, no, do a lot more, because, you know, only now do I feel like I'm starting to get a rhythm and a routine. And if I'm going to keep that up, it's going to have to stay consistent for a while.
Yeah. And then like great questions to ask, like, you know, that with the song with Maddie, where there was the last one that you did, I'm always going back and doing kind of retrospective analysis of like, okay, why did they take that one? Why did that one really jump out to them? And then, you know, maybe it's because whatever, like you find out, you know, the show airs and you see how they used it and be like, oh, they never told me that this was like somebody died in this scene and they just wanted something ironically. Like, once you find that out, then you're like, oh man, there's no way I could have ever known that. And therefore, like, there's not really a great learning lesson from that specific use case. You know what I mean? So you can't beat yourself up. You can't beat yourself up too much about it because they didn't give you the information. There's no way you could have known. And so you just got lucky. And that's, you know, that happens. But then there's other times where you can look at it and be like, oh, like they took songs 3, 4, 5, and those were all up tempo, and they didn't take the down tempo ones. There's a pattern. Some evidence. There's a pattern. What am I going to start making now? What am I going to start sending them? Up tempo.
Oh, I love that. But I think this is the importance of asking questions. So I guess the whole idea of this episode was ask questions, and kind of like, I think the good piece of advice you gave before you ask the question, ask yourself, is this like the end question? Like, you know, like how much, or could you backtrack a couple to a little bit more in the process that could give you actually the answer you could start taking action with, as opposed to like, you know, how do I protect myself in all these songs? And it's like, right. Well, before we get to that, why don't you write like a couple more? That might be a little bit better of a question to ask. That is, I think, great advice to backtrack a little bit and not assume the final question is the question you should be asking, but somewhere like in the middle, that little sweet spot, the middle.
Especially like finding your pain points, like, you know, look back at those and be like, man, I did 3 songs and I really struggled here, you know, right at this kind of like 25% finished mark. Yeah. How can I like improve that? Like, does everybody struggle at that mark too? Like, that's a great point to like start asking questions. Like, you know, when I start layering my bass guitar, my mixes get really muddy. Does that happen to you? Like, how do I fix that?
That's
you know?
a good question. Like, that's like
that's
awesome.
A great question.
It's like, oh, my drums drop out when I add more things. Should I add more to the drums? Should I add another layer? Where should I?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe. Let's listen. Let's dig into it.
Dude, this was great. So we'll ask more questions. We'll do more question episodes.
Absolutely.
Hey, it's Mike from Songwriting for Guitar. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And hey, don't leave. We got other cool videos you should check out too. Like some of these right here. Oh, that one right there. That's really good. You should click that. Right there. Just click it.